Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Edwards, the Executive Director of the Institute of Politics, and on behalf of the entire staff and student leadership of the IOP, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight for what promises to be a fun, insightful, and fascinating conversation with United States Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by International House and by the Seminary Co-op Bookstore. Please join me in giving both of them a warm round of applause, and thanks for all that they do for us here. It's always great to be back in this beautiful room, and we thank everybody at iHouse for all that they do for the IOP. By the way, Seminary Co-op will be offering sales of a copy of Senator McCaskill's new book, Plenty Ladylike, and she will be signing copies of the book immediately after tonight's talk. You can find out more about our speaker series, of which this event is a part, by going online to politics.uchicago.edu. We have a number of great events coming up in the next week. Tomorrow morning, bright and early at 8 o'clock with breakfast and a talk at 8:30 in the morning. Back in this room, we will be welcoming House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, so we encourage you to join us for that. Next week, we'll continue on with sessions with the Moroccan ambassador to the U.S., as well as Scott Carter, who is executive producer of Real Time with Bill Maher. We'll have that along with all of our fellow seminars. Once again, politics.uchicago.edu. In the middle of tonight's conversation, we will bring up a microphone and open the floor to questions from you, the audience. We ask that all of you, certainly who are interested in posing questions, do so, but you keep your questions short and to the point so that we can get to as many of you as possible. We also hope to give priority tonight to students, as is our custom here. And speaking of students, let me introduce the woman who will be formally welcoming our guest speakers tonight. Her name is Mara Hennigan. She is a fourth year here at the college, one of the most active leaders in the IOP. The list of her involvement and activities at the Institute could fill up the next hour or so, it seems like. They include working as project director for our student civic engagement efforts, also being co-director of our Citizen Schools Initiative, co-chair of our Women in Public Service effort, and a former member of our Student Executive Board. Her hometown is here in Chicago. She is a major in public policy with a concentration in education policy. Please join me in welcoming Mara Hennigan. Mara?
Thank you. It is a great honor to welcome Senator Claire McCaskill to campus this evening. Senator McCaskill has spent her life in public service and has an accomplished record serving her constituents at the city, state, and federal levels. Born and raised in Missouri, Senator McCaskill put herself through undergraduate and law school at the University of Missouri-Columbia before becoming an assistant prosecutor in Kansas City. In 1992, she made history as the first woman elected to serve as Jackson County prosecutor, a position she held until becoming Missouri State Auditor in 1999. In 2006, Senator McCaskill became the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from Missouri. Bringing her passion for accountability, transparency, and efficiency to Washington, Senator McCaskill quickly set to work on a campaign promise to curb wasteful wartime spending. Senator McCaskill strategically ran and won her re-election campaign in 2012, and now serves as a leader on veterans issues, reducing congressional earmarks, and increasing government oversight. Senator McCaskill has shown incredible voice and leadership in the Senate and is known for her ability to connect with her constituents, often through her very active Twitter account, which I highly recommend. In her new memoir, Plenty Ladylike, Senator McCaskill details her life in public service, recounts the obstacles she faced as a woman in public service, and provides smart, practical advice and wisdom. Much like the senator herself, the book has been praised for its strong, proud defense of female ambition, especially in the male-dominated field of politics. Senator McCaskill is known for being authentic, practical, and determined, serving as an inspiration to women pursuing public service, myself most definitely included. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by Brandis Friedman. She is a correspondent for Chicago Tonight, a nightly news program on Chicago's PBS. We're incredibly lucky to have both these women here with us today. Please join me in welcoming Senator McCaskill.
Thank you, and thank you, Maura, for that introduction. Future public servant, I suspect.
Yes.
Senator McCaskill, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's a beautiful place. Wow.
Isn't it?
Nice digs.
First, nice digs. You guys are doing okay at University of Chicago, aren't you? So first, my condolences On the Cardinals?
Oh, had to start with that.
Sorry, we're not sorry.
So, yeah, the Royals are playing for the American League Championship. So we just like to say in Missouri, we had the best team for the regular season in the National League and the best team in the American League, and no other state can say that. So we're just going to stick to that line and try to forget the Cubbies winning the divisional series.
Go Cubs. So anyways, I'm teasing. About your book, Plenty Ladylike, why write a memoir now?
Well, I've been asked that a lot. Really what happened was after the 2012 race, it got such national prominence because of the chapter in the book called The Magic Uterus, which is when Todd Akin talked about legitimate rape. It became such a national race that, and I knew kind of the machinations that had gone on behind the scenes, what we had done in the primary to promote Todd Akin, and I thought it was an interesting political story. So I worked with a retired journalist, and we put a proposal together. And Simon & Schuster bought the book, but when they bought the book, they said, we would like you to expand it and make it more about having a front row seat for over 30 years of a woman in politics working her way up and tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I said, okay. And it sounded kind of romantic at the time. It turned out to be harder than I thought, but that's how the book came about. It was really about talking about the special nature that our 2012 race had.
And like writing a book, it's also, I've heard, like giving birth, like reliving your life and having you remember each of those details. And
yeah,
it's a
I mean,
job.
and this book's personal. I hope when you read it, you get a sense of my failures and my heartaches, the really tough times in my life, the really good times in my life. I tried to be unvarnished and incredibly candid. In fact, when my editor read the book the first time after we sent it in, she said, have you decided not to run again? I said, is that a good compliment or is that a bad critique? She said, no, it's just so candid. And I said, no, that's what I want to do. I don't want to write one of these bromide-filled, isn't America wonderful and aren't I wonderful? And I wanted to show everything, warts and all.
And you mentioned the good, the bad, and the ugly, but you also covered the funny. I'd like to go back to the beginning of Motormouth McCaskill.
Yes,
the
beginning.
Which is a nickname you earned.
That's what I earned. Yeah, I was Motormouth McCaskill in grade school. And in fact, the title of the book came from, to some extent, my habit of talking a lot, because not only did Todd Akin say that I wasn't ladylike after our first televised debate, when I was a young girl in about the 7th grade, a teacher I adored came up to me after class and said, Claire, you need to quit talking so much in class. The boys aren't going to like you. And it's just not very ladylike. So those events in my life kind of made me want to reclaim the word ladylike for ambitious, outspoken, aggressive, strategic women. So I'm putting a stake in it.
You write that your parents, as you were growing up, they encouraged your independence and self-sufficiency, occasionally being a little bossy and opinionated. Were your parents ahead of their time?
It's a good question. I think my parents, my dad, I think, was ahead of his time. My dad, we used to tease him that he was a feminist, and he would object with horror, the idea that we were calling him a feminist. But Dad really did. I mean, Mom was out there. I mean, she was a hoot. They were both very active in political campaigns. They forced me to say trick or treat and vote for JFK when I was 7 years old. They had me handing out nail files and fans at political events when I was just a cute little girl. So they both were very encouraging about us understanding what politics was, and we were taught that it was honorable. We were never told that politicians were crooks or horrible people. We were told that they were people trying to make a difference in our community and in our state and in our nation. But Dad was the one who really gave me permission, and he was the one that would reassure me He's the one who encouraged me to do speech contests. He was the one who talked to me about how quickly I spoke and how I needed to slow down so people could understand me. He was the one who kept saying, don't worry about whether the boys like you. The smart ones will figure it out eventually. He was the one that figured out I wasn't getting dates in college because I was such a loudmouth, and would call me and tell me, don't worry, men will figure it out. Real men will figure it out. And he was right, they did. But so Dad really, probably because he was such an important male figure in my life, really gave me permission to be all of the things that I think helped steer me through a successful political career.
How did you know so early on that you would run for office?
I liked it. I mean, I liked campaigns. I liked the feel. When I started working in campaigns as very young, was working in campaigns in junior high and high school. I went, and when we'd go to these they used to call them stump speaks in Missouri, stump speeches. And what they would do, the candidates would all come and they'd put, it used to be that you'd stand on a stump and talk, that's what the name comes from, but they'd put a flatbed truck in the courthouse lawn and people would come and hear everyone speak, and all the other kids would be running around, and I would actually be listening to Tom Eagleton give a speech, and I would be listening to Stuart Symington give a speech. And so I was taken by it at a young age, and then it helped probably that my mother and father both told me I was going to be the first woman governor about 14 times a day from the time I was 12 or 13 years old.
So you talk about some sexist behavior. I was reading through page 10. You're going to court, there's an attorney that you're up against who tells you to get you some supplies and coffee, honey. Get him some supplies and coffee. So you did, and then you came back and you did your job. In a situation like that, and you faced many of them over the course of your career, as you write in the book, in a situation like that, some women might have said, go get it yourself. But you didn't do that. You beat him in court, obviously. But why is it better to do that?
Well, I'm not sure it is, and I talk about that in the book. I'm not sure I did this right or perfectly. I did not confront. When I was a young assistant prosecutor and I was doing a deposition with the rape victim, and the man that told me to get him a pad of paper, a cup of coffee, one cream and one sugar, a blue pen, a red pen, and a number 2 pencil, honey. I did go get all those things, and we did the deposition, and I was polite. Yes, Mr. Gepford, happy to, Mr. Gepford. And then I did kick his ass all over the courtroom 6 weeks later because I used that as fuel. I used it to motivate me. The same thing when I came to the Missouri legislature as a very young woman. When I went up to the Speaker of the House, he was on the dais, and I asked him if he could help me get my bill out of committee. I was 29 years old, single, a young attorney, fresh into the Missouri House of Representatives, and he looked at me and he said, well, you're going to have to bring your knee pads. And, at that moment, I'm not sure that I did the right thing because I laughed it off and walked away. And I think young women today are probably better equipped than I was then to figure out the right way to confront it. I, once again, internalized it and said, I'm better than he is, I'm smarter than he is, I'll go farther than he will. As it turned out, he ended up in prison and I ended up in the United States Senate. So, had a good ending.
You've heard some ugly stuff. You just mentioned a couple of them. You have to read the book if you want to see the others. But how have you turned those into opportunities for you?
Well, I think it was unfair in a way because I did, I think, work incredibly hard to prove myself over and above where a lot of my male colleagues were. I was the only woman attorney in the General Assembly. A lot of the women that were in the General Assembly when I was a state legislator were there because of their spouses, deaths, or other calamities. And most of the women were working on the Children, Youth, and Families Committee or in the Education Committee. There'd never been a woman on the Criminal Justice Committee. So I decided I would be an expert, a reliable source of information and credibility in criminal justice because I knew so much about it. I'd spent 4 years in the courtroom trying felony cases. And because I believe I tried to mix self-deprecating humor and assertiveness in a way that removed me from being too threatening to people that would want to cut me down. Not that I didn't still have to put up with a lot of stuff I shouldn't have had to put up with as a young woman, but eventually people began to figure out that I knew a lot about the criminal law. And one of my finest moments is near the end of when I was leaving the state legislature to go back to Jackson County to run for prosecutor. Some of the good old boys were coming to me to help them with their amendments. And it was like, oh my gosh, the worm turns. They need me. So it was great. And I've kind of used humor and, try to walk that line. And I can't tell you where the line is for you. I know it's a line you've got to find between being assertive and smart, but not going so far that you're so unlikable that no one wants to work with you. And I think it's very doable. I don't have some magic ability. Everybody has the ability to do that, and it's a skill that both men and women need. But up until, I hope it's not as much as now as it was when I was young, women really needed it, especially in a male-dominated field.
Your mother was the first woman elected to serve on the city council in Columbia, Missouri. What lessons did you learn from her experience?
Well, Mother was very embarrassing to me. I'll give you one anecdote that will kind of tell the tale. Mom got elected to the city council, and we all went to see her sworn in, and she had a brown paper bag with her. And she went up to take the oath. And this was in Columbia, Missouri, and in case you guys know what the university is famous for, it's the School of Journalism. So there's about 7 journalists for every citizen in Missouri, in Columbia, because the J School students are everywhere. So believe it or not, covering the swearing into the city council, there's like 10 people covering it from the J School. So the press was all there and the cameras were all there. Mom walks up with this brown paper bag. She opens the brown paper bag and takes out a picture of us and puts it on her dais. And we're all in the back row going, oh my God, what is she doing? Then she takes out a vase of flowers and puts it on the dais. Then she takes out an apron and ties it on. Now, there'd never been a woman on the city council. And I was just nothing but embarrassed because I was like a sophomore in high school. But looking back on it, I realized what a role model she was for me at that moment. That was a brave thing for her to do, and it was visual. So it was memorable, and visual matters in politics. For those of you that are studying how to win campaigns, you know that when a candidate says it coming out of their mouth, it makes a big difference in terms of how persuasive that is. So visual matters. And the other thing she was saying was sending the message. There's a different perspective at this table now. I bring a different set of priorities and to this table than has been here before. And so she was role modeling for me. I thought it was terribly embarrassing, but she was showing through courage and strength that she was proud of who she was. She wasn't ashamed that she had never worked for a salary outside the home, and she was going to bring that perspective right there to the city council. So that gives you an idea. That, and when Mom would campaign with me, is my favorite. 2006, we'd go to these really rural areas, and we'd be in this RV, and Mom was walking with a cane then. We'd pull up in a gas station. There'd be 7 or 8 guys around in their overalls and their John Deere caps. And these are not the kind of people that you look at and say, oh, good Democrats, right? I mean, you know this is a tough audience. Mom would get out of the RV and she'd walk over to the gas pump, and these guys would all be standing around. Of course, she'd be friendly as all get out to them. Hey, what's going on? And then she'd look at the gas pump and she'd look at them and she'd look at the gas pump and she'd go, that George Bush is an oil man, isn't he? And they go, well, yes, he is, as a matter of fact. We're sick of it. And by the time we'd leave the gas station, they'd all be taking bumper stickers. She would get them all eating out of the palm of her hand. So she was quite a role model for me growing up.
Your secret weapon in 2006, it sounds like.
She was a great secret weapon for me in 2006.
And by 2006, you're running running a statewide campaign, because obviously you're running for the U.S. Senate. What lessons did you apply to that campaign that you had learned from your previous gubernatorial race? Well,
my lifelong wish to be governor, I challenged the sitting governor of my own party in 2004. In case you haven't read this in your textbooks, you don't do that. You don't challenge the sitting governor of your own party. I knew that the governor wasn't going to be able to win, and so we ran. Joseph was very supportive. My husband was very supportive and said, you should do it, and I did it, and I beat him handily in the primary. So I kind of thought it was over. I was measuring the curtains in the governor's mansion. The guy I was running against looked like he was 12. He's my colleague's son, in fact, Roy Blunt's son, Matt Blunt. And I was very confident, and I knew so much about state government because I'd been the state auditor. So when the campaign was over and I lost, one of the journalists said, you know, you reminded me of an obnoxious Jeopardy contestant in that campaign. And we did a focus group in trying to decide whether I should turn around and take on an incumbent U.S. Senator 2 years later. And they asked the women in the focus group, and we're watching this through the one-way mirror glass, and this woman in the focus group says, well, you know, she kind of reminds me of Cruella de Vil. And that's when I realized I'd probably not been relatable in the governor's race. That I had been so anxious to prove that I was capable and competent and ready for the job, I'd forgot to tell Missourians that I had the same hopes and fears that they did, that I was worried about my kids, and I was worried about my mom's health care, and I was worried about all the things they worry about, and I slowed down and, you know, used my mom in the campaign. I talked about my children. My children helped me in the campaign. A couple of them were in ads, and I think, I don't want to say I softened myself, I just allowed myself to be more vulnerable on a personal level, and I think it helped a lot.
Then fast forwarding in 2012, you mentioned Todd Akin earlier. We have to talk about him, obviously. In the book, you revealed that you and your campaign had sort of devised a plan to be sure that he won his party's primary because you knew that you could beat him in the general. Why reveal that? Why not keep that secret in your pocket for 2018?
As I was writing this book, I realized that somebody asked me, what do you want to get out of it? What I really want to get out of it is I'm looking around this audience and I see all these young women. What I really want is about as many of you as possible to read it, and about half of you figure out that you can run for office and win. So I wanted to show that taking risks and being highly strategic is part of winning. There's nothing wrong with being highly strategic. I did nothing in that primary that was unethical or illegal. It was novel, it was different, it was risky, but I want women to feel comfortable with that level of risk and that level of strategic thinking. So that's why I included it in the book. And what we did was, we had 3 opponents. All 3 of them were going to vote like Tea Party. They were all very, very conservative. So there wasn't a dime's worth of difference between them in terms of how they were going to vote. But one of them had a record that was more easily criticized because he was so sincere, he had no filter. And he said weird things all the time, like, in the heart of every liberal is a hatred of God. He said Barack Obama is a menace to society. And some of these things he'd said on the House floor because he'd been a congressman. So he didn't have much money, and the other 2 had money. So we decided to poll in the Republican primary voters, poll them, and find out what about Todd Akin did they like. As it turned out, they really liked that he said Barack Obama is a menace to society. They loved that. So we did an ad. We didn't use third parties. We didn't send smoke signals, no super PACs, no dark money. The ad said, I'm Claire McCaskill, and I approve this message. Todd Akin is too conservative for Missouri. And then I listed all the things that the primary voters loved about Todd Akin. And by the way, those same things the primary voters loved about him, the independent voters I needed to win didn't like about him. So it was a twofer. I was helping him get the nomination and disqualifying him with the crucial voters in Missouri, the independent voters. I spent more on that ad than Todd Akin had spent in his entire campaign. Almost $2 million worth of that ad ran on TV. And letters to the editor started showing up that said, if Claire McCaskill says he's too conservative, he's just right for me. Thank you very much. That's what I hoped you'd think. So I was the perfect messenger to tell them that he was too conservative. And it worked, and he won. And then he exceeded our expectations.
In the book, they call him the gift that keeps on giving.
The gift that keeps on giving.
With his legitimate rape and such. So, or his comments about it. Other women in politics have been considered or have been called calculating for that kind of strategy. Were you not concerned about being considered that same thing?
I think calculating is just fine. What's wrong with calculating? I don't get that. You know, are men bad when they're calculating? I mean, how many men do you know that have been wildly successful that haven't been calculating? Well, if women want to be wildly successful, I say we need to get on the calculating bus and be calculating.
Get your calculator out.
To use a pejorative term, when you're really just talking about like a highly strategic risk, yes, risk. But that's another thing that I think women need to be comfortable with, taking risk. I think sometimes security is so attractive that women sometimes have that disease to appease, and if they're secure, then why rock the boat? And if you're not rocking the boat, you're not making any progress. So I think calculating is fine. I wear ambition, calculating, I'm fine with that adjective.
And on that note, you write in the book that some of your colleagues are always coy about professing their higher ambitions, whatever they might be, but you never have been, and you think it's weird that they are. Why do you think they do that?
I think they don't want people to think. I don't know. It's weird. I mean, it's not like people don't know better. I mean, if you see somebody on TV and you ask them if there's well, do you want to be governor? Oh, well, take this one at a time, and it's the people's decision. People know they want to be governor. Why not just say it? I don't get that. I always said I wanted to be governor. It turned out I didn't get to be governor, but.
As long as we're on the note, is there anything you want to share about?
No, I honestly don't want to be president. So there you go.
And we know you're telling the truth.
I really don't.
Yeah.
I'm very happy in the job I am and hope to do it for a while. And then they will not carry me out of there, however. One of my favorite lines, and I always get a laugh in my speeches, people ask me why I went to Washington. I said, it was the only place in America a woman my age could be a hot young chick. I will not stay forever. I will not do that.
Would you consider returning to Missouri to run for
governor? I thought about it this time. I mean, I really did consider it because it's open this cycle. But Jefferson City, the legislature in Jefferson City is so bad right now, I just didn't think I had the patience. I would have been fighting them every day, and it wouldn't have been pretty. It would have been worse than Washington.
What advice do you offer, maybe to some of the young women in this audience, but what advice do you offer to young women about considering entering politics, or for those who are turned off from it entirely?
Well, first of all, for those that are turned off, who think you don't want to do it because it's ugly and brutal, and you can't be idealistic and be a politician, let me just tell you that success is not what you own, it's loving what you do. And I have been so incredibly blessed by my career. Yes, it's hard. Yes, people say terribly mean things about you and to you. And yes, your personal life becomes public in ways that is sometimes painful. But every day, my feet hit the floor and I couldn't wait to get to work. And I've had amazing moments where I know I've made a difference for people, a real difference. I mean, sometimes it's little things like a man who was on Omaha Beach who'd never gotten his veterans benefits. And sometimes it's bigger. When I started drug courts in Kansas City, one of the first in the country, and couldn't get the police to get with the program. They were very anti-drug court, thought it was being too soft on drug dealers. And a year later, after we'd had the program going for a year, looking in the back of the room at a drug court graduation and seeing the entire tax squad that went into drug houses in uniform, standing, clapping, and catching one of them crying for the drug court graduates that were going across and having their cases dismissed. I mean, does it get any better than that? Really, does it get any better than that? And there's flexibility for women and families. I didn't have to ask anybody's permission if I wanted to take off in the middle of the afternoon and go watch my son in the talent show at middle school. Now, I had to work weekends, and the hours are hard, but you do have more flexibility. So I hope that those who think it's somehow not for you reconsider that. And those of you who are thinking about it, I will write you a check, but you have to call and ask me for it. So I want young women to run for office. We have 20 women in the U.S. Senate right now, and I don't mean to be insulting to the men in the room, but the data now shows we get more done, we're more bipartisan, we pass more bills, and if we get 60 women in the United States Senate, I'm telling you what, this country will be in better shape.
All of that said, why is sexism still alive in 2015? I was listening to a radio story this morning about ESPN's Jessica Mendoza. She was the first female voice to call a major league game in the playoffs. It's 2015, and she got all sorts of ugly responses on ESPN's website about, I'm done with baseball if we've got women calling the games now, and, it turns it off for me. And why do women still have to live through this?
Well, I think the first women to break through always have it the hardest. And this is a new voice in calling major sports. There have not been female voices doing play-by-play or color for major professional sports in this country. Part of it is that I think my husband would probably say this, since women typically don't play some professional major sports. They don't play football. There is not really major equivalent women's Major League Baseball. So I think the men kind of think, well, this is ours. This isn't yours. But I would give her advice and say, power through it, do a good job, and people will come around. Because there was a time when a woman doing a lot of jobs, there was a lot of resistance. But over time, that goes away, and she's a trailblazer. So you get a lot more grief when you're a trailblazer.
It's harder, isn't it? What do people have wrong about Claire McCaskill?
Oh, that's a good question. I hope not much, because I hope I really am who I am to everyone. I think some people probably think I'm meaner than I am, because I have a tendency when I'm questioning at hearings, the prosecutor in me comes out, and I believe that it's a wasted opportunity if you don't get some information out of that witness that they don't want to give you. So whether I'm questioning the CEO of General Motors over a deadly flaw that killed people in their ignition switches, or whether I'm calling Dr. Oz to task for the phony baloney BS, I would say something else if I weren't in front of a bunch of college students. You know what I would say, about take this pill and you'll be thin, or green coffee beans will get rid of your belly fat, or whatever he hawks on that stupid program of his. So, I want to make a point. It feels like a waste of time if I'm not making a point. So sometimes I get carried away. I get very passionate. And I think if you see that in isolation, you think, that's a mean woman. So I'm not mean. My grandchildren call my house the house of yes. I am a pushover. I am really a softie. I cry a lot.
That's all the questions I have.
Okay, good. Well,
Okay, so we can go now.
You guys have questions?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I'll come up with a question very quickly while we're still waiting on the microphone. I can do that because I'm a reporter and I get paid to ask questions. Yeah, lots and lots of money too. No future reporters in here? No? Wrong house. One of the things you wrote about in the book also was the woman of the Senate dinners. And you talked about, how women get things accomplished. How valuable are those dinners? I mean, are they similar to what everybody else is basically doing?
No, it's pretty special because we have, even though there are women in the Senate that I disagree with very much on policy, we all have had similar experiences in terms of our path there. It's hard to get to the United States Senate. And so the women who have accomplished it, we have a lot in common. And we talk about our kids, we dish a little bit about some of the guys. We laugh a lot, we joke a lot. It's just a place where we can be totally, it's like a circle of trust. Because now with cell phones, and everyone is a photographer, everyone is a video recorder, everyone is trying to catch you saying something you shouldn't say or doing something you shouldn't be doing. So there's this palpable sense of relief when it's just us in a room and nobody else is there, because we can say whatever the hell we feel like saying and not worry about whether it's going to be twisted or distorted or used against us. And the other circle of trust we have is that we don't make points at each other's expense. And if I were to try to pinpoint what was really wrong with Washington right now, the first thing would be the inability to compromise and losing that as an important value of our democracy. And the second thing is we've gotten into a bad habit of thinking it's not worthy if we're not making the other guy look bad. So it's always about a gotcha moment. You know, we do it to the Republicans do it to us. Well, we don't do that to each other among the women. We don't make points at each other's expense. And so I hope we keep that kind of collegiality as we grow and get larger, and as more of us move into important leadership roles in the Senate and in Congress. But now it's special, and my favorite one is once a year we ask the women of the Supreme Court, and they come over, and the notorious RBG lights the place up. She is something else. I mean to tell you, she is an amazing woman, and it's so much fun to have the women of the Supreme Court there, because they can definitely keep up with us in terms of dishing.
Have you taught any of them how to shotgun a beer? Because you told your daughters she shotgunned a beer in 2012.
I did. I told my daughters I'd shotgun a beer if Todd Aiken won the primary. So I did. I'd never shotgunned a beer, but there's pictures on my Twitter feed if you want to look it up.
You haven't taught any of the other women
No,
how this
no.
goes,
In fact, they all thought I
spreading
was
that among the
crazy for
sisterhood.
admitting I shotgunned a beer. But
Okay. Hi, how are you?
I'm Mr. Balagoon from Urban Prep Inglewood High School. I'm a sophomore.
Okay.
And I just wanted to ask, what have you done or tried to do about the rising costs of higher education and student loan debt, particularly for people of color or from low-income households?
well, as you may know, we raised the amount of Pell Grants under the Obama administration. We did that about the same time we passed the Affordable Care Act. That was one. We wouldn't be able to get that done today, but we were able to get it done then. Two, there is a bill that I'm a co-sponsor of that would allow everyone to refinance their student loans. The government is making money off your interest of your student loans. To me, that is borderline immoral when students are paying higher interest rates than Joe Average going out to buy any consumer goods or a car. So we have got that bill. I know our candidates for president are for that bill. We have tried to get the bill through Congress, and we've run into opposition from the Republicans. So that is obviously another important thing that we want to do. The other thing is we're beginning to really try to formulate some legislative policy around the ideas of apprenticeships so that you can actually hook someone into a job at the same time they're going to school, so that the school is really the training for the work they're going to do. And I'm not just saying limited it to vocational skill. It could actually be a 2 or 4 year degree. But that way you could share some of the costs with the future employer, so it wouldn't be as much a burden on the student, because they would also be working at the same time for their future employer. That's used a lot in other countries. We've not really gone to that model here, and it's something that we're talking about that we think might be viable as we try to look to bring down the incredible burden that so many of you are going to have when you graduate.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm a student here at UChicago, but I'm from New York, which is the home state of Senator Gillibrand. And I know that now you're working together for campus sexual assault legislation, but I'm curious about sort of the fight between your rival military sexual assault bills, what it was like to be rivals with a fellow woman in the Senate, and also your bill was more of a conservative strategy, I guess, than hers was.
It wasn't.
Maybe you think otherwise.
No, it wasn't.
But what was it like
But I'll be glad to
be...
explain to you why.
Okay.
First of all, there's a long part of the book about this, because it was very hard for me. I spent more time in a courtroom holding hands of victims of sexual assault than maybe ever any senator in history. I'd done hundreds of sexual assault cases. So I would put my commitment to victims of sexual assault up against anybody's in this country. So what I did, first of all, she and I had a long bill, and we got all of it done. We only disagreed on one. And the press was so excited that there were two women disagreeing that they couldn't handle it. It was like all they wanted to write about, all they wanted to talk about was the fact that she and I disagreed on one piece of a 30-plank piece of legislation. We made major historic changes in sexual assault in the military. We disagreed on one, and the reason I disagreed with her is I spent a lot of time at the Pentagon talking to the prosecutors. And I found out that intuitively, I started out thinking what she thought. The problem was commanders weren't letting cases go forward. That's not what was occurring. Lawyers, in fact, were saying this case doesn't have enough evidence to go forward, and commanders were saying it needs to go forward to a trial. Lawyers get so focused on whether or not they're going to win or lose, sometimes they don't want to take a case to court that they think is a loser. In a lot of consent defense cases, prosecutors unfortunately think they're losers. So the problem wasn't that women weren't getting to court. The problem was women weren't getting support at the time they needed it when they reported. So I knew what they really needed was their own lawyer, and we were able to get that done. Imagine the difference. If Gillibrand's proposal had passed, when a lawyer said there's not enough evidence, it was over. The case was over. Under my plan, if the lawyer says there's not enough evidence, the commander can overrule that, and they do all the time, and send the case to court. More importantly, if the commander disagrees with the lawyer about whether the case can go forward, there's now 2 more levels of appeal, all the way up to the civilian head of that armed services. We took away the commander's ability to screw around with punishment. So if you're a victim and you're in Afghanistan and you've been raped by somebody in your unit, imagine when you're going to feel more protected from retaliation. That a lawyer a half a continent away is looking at your case, or if the commander in your unit has said this case is going forward. Now, which do you think protects that victim more? So I believe my version was much better for victims than her version. It's not intuitive, but if you look at the Citizens Response Panel that looked at this in depth, it had feminist icons on it like Liz Holtzman. If you don't know who she is, Google her. She was a champion for women's rights, a former congresswoman from New York. The woman who did some of the first legal decisions overturning some of the issues around gay marriage. The woman who heads victim services for the country was on this panel. They all agreed with me when they looked at it in depth. But the press wanted to cover it. It was victims versus commanders, and I was coddling commanders. And Kirsten was the champion for the victims. So can you tell how hard it was for me? I'm going on too long. But nothing was more painful for me than being painted that somehow I was being less aggressive on behalf of victims. So read that part in the book and look at it, and hopefully I've convinced you that I wasn't more conservative than she was. I was more protective.
You have. Thank you.
Thank you.
How is your relationship with Senator Gillibrand today?
Great. In fact, this was obviously a passionate fight because I believe very much that I was correct, and I felt just as strongly as she did. And the vote was over, and it was close. We won by a handful of votes. And when it was over, she and I, in the well of the Senate, hugged each other. And I'll never forget, Jay Rockefeller walked up to us afterwards, and he said, I've seen a lot of disagreements in this chamber that had that kind of passion. I've never seen 2 people come together immediately after and be cordial and loving to each other like you guys were. So we're fine.
All right. Thank you, Senator McCaskill. It's been great to hear from you. But you've been a part of both state and national government, and I was wondering if you could shed some light on the differences between those positions, and if you feel like your influence to both young women and to making change for your constituents is more pronounced at the state level or at the national level?
You know, that's a really good question. I think I'm going to give kind of a cheesy answer because it depends. You have more direct influence at the state and local level. And a lot of it depends on whether you're an executive or whether you're in a legislative branch. I mean, the legislative branch is a much different exercise than executive. Executive, you prioritize. I mean, as a prosecutor, as the auditor, I put a staff together. I organized our priorities. We had a team. We could go execute and do what we needed to do, as long as we had a budget, which we needed the legislature for. In the legislature, you have to play well with others. You have to find the sweet spot. You have to be willing to compromise. You have to be willing to work with people that you find repugnant and disgusting sometimes. And so it's a different kind of exercise. I would say the big difference between the federal and the state legislature is, if you're intellectually curious, the federal legislative body is eons above the state legislative body because of the wide variety of issues you deal with. I mean, they're not worried about Syria in Jefferson City or in Springfield. They're not worried about what are we going to do about bandwidth in this country. How are we going to make sure everybody can still stream movies it wants to without having to pay an extra $50 a month? How are we going to make sure trains are safe that are carrying all this crude oil? What about China and cybersecurity? I mean, I could list so many interesting topics, and I can do 5 or 6 of them in one day. I mean, it is incredibly intellectually stimulating. And it's not as intellectually stimulating at the state level. Still important stuff. You got criminal justice stuff you can work on. You have education is much more focused in state legislatures than the federal legislature. So I think you should start at the state and then come to federal.
Thanks.
All right.
Hi, I'm Victoria. I'm a 4th year in the college here. I'm from a neighboring state. I'm from Oklahoma. So I'm really curious what unique challenges there are to being a woman in politics in Missouri.
Well, you relate to some of them if you're from Oklahoma. There are still a bunch of people in Missouri that are never going to vote for me. And even though they may not say it out loud because I'm a woman, secretly that has a lot to do with it. My state is not a blue state by any stretch. I hang on to the title of purple. Sometimes it's a fantasy. Mitt Romney won, I think, by 12 or 13 points last time. Although Barack Obama came really close to winning in 2008. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And so, but I've won statewide a number of times, and I've always been pro-choice. I publicly opposed the amendment in our Constitution prohibiting gay marriage. So you can survive in a state like Missouri having progressive principles. You just have to work really hard to make sure you show you're independent. When I came out that I wasn't going to vote for Harry Reid for leader, that was hard for me to do because Harry's my friend, but I didn't think he was the right person to lead us again in the Senate. I made sure everybody in Missouri knew I did that because that sends a very strong signal to them that I am independent, that I'm not going to be co-opted by party leaders to do what they think is best. I have the independence to do what I think is best. And as long as I show them that independence, not say I'm independent, but can demonstrably show them I'm independent, I can get it across the finish line.
Thank you.
Hello, hi, thanks
Hi.
for coming. My name's Emily, I'm a 1st year from New York. And my question for you is, well, it's a long one. There, as you know, are a lot of candidates that are running for president right now, mostly in one of the parties, but there's still a lot of candidates. And I was wondering which candidates you predict, or rather hope, will ultimately be the final candidates, and if you think that we will have a female president in the near future.
Oh, this is easy.
Okay.
I am hoping for Trump. A Trump-Carson ticket would be perfect. And I think Hillary Clinton, either Tim Kaine or one of the Castro brothers would be perfect. So that's my hope. It's a great year to be a political science student. This is going to be a fascinating journey through the American psyche when it comes to electing presidents. I'm stunned that north of 60% of the Republican primary voters are expressing their preference for someone who has never done this before. We've never had that in our country. By the way, that feeling that we want someone who doesn't know much about this job, that isn't true on the Democratic side. There is a wide swath of Republican voters that really think government should just go away, have no confidence in their government whatsoever, and they just want everyone to be gone and start with new people, even if these people are making no sense. So that was my editorial comment at the end, in case you couldn't tell. So I think an institutional candidate will end up prevailing, however. And I can't tell you which it will be, but it's probably either Bush or Rubio that will end up prevailing on the Republican side. I believe that. Now, I may be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'll be dancing the jig in St. Louis, Missouri, because I don't think America will elect Trump or Carson or Fiorina president. I don't believe that. And I'm sure a bunch of you feel the burn. No? Yes? Raise your hand if you feel the burn. Yeah, okay. So I get it. I do. I know you're all mad at me because I went on Morning Joe and said that he was unelectable. But I always say what I think. I think he's unelectable. I love him. I think the conversation that he is having is an important one to have. I think it is helping our country. I'm glad he's doing it. But I know Bernie. He's my friend, and he's really good at railing. And he's focused like a laser on one huge problem we have that we have to get fixed. But we've got to have somebody who can bring people together. We've got to have somebody who has negotiated difficult things, who's worked with people a lot that didn't agree with her. I just think she is a more pragmatic choice for what our country needs right now. And on most of the issues, there's not much of a difference between her and Bernie in terms of how she will actually prioritize things as president. So I know you feel the burn. Don't be mad at me, but get excited for Hillary when she wins the primary. Just promise me you will. Promise me you won't quit on me.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming, Senator McCaskill. I think, so your book and the conversation tonight, you talked a lot about empowering women, but also the challenges that you faced as a woman in politics. Can you talk a little bit about the advantages you may have had as a woman in politics?
That's fair. I've had some. I think women start out with a aura of trustworthiness. I think people assumed, correctly I might add, but I think they continue to give a little bit of an edge to a woman that she's not doing this for her own personal elevation. That this isn't about her having more power or just working the system to be a big deal, that there really are issues she cares about. Now, I think that's because there have been so many political scandals over the years, and so, not that the vast majority of people in politics aren't good, honest people, but the bad apples have made politics look bad, and they've all been men. But that's not because women aren't capable of being notoriously unethical. There just hasn't been critical mass of them that we've had any that have surfaced as unethical. It will happen. There will be a woman who cuts the corners and does illegal things and goes to jail. You guys have had a bunch of men go to jail in Illinois. We've had a few in Missouri. So I think that trustworthiness is something that women start out with. That's about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Senator McCaskill. I'm Olivia Ortiz, a sexual assault survivor on campus and a Title IX complainant for the past 2 years. At UChicago, we have a huge rape problem as well as a huge administrator antagonistic problem. Pretty much every administrator I encounter is antagonistic to me. I was interested in your new bill for the Congress. I'm actually kind of concerned about it because I'm concerned about the fact that it would open Title IX. While I find the fact that it would take 1% of universities' budgets really exciting, I would love 1% of UChicago's budget to be gone. I find it terrifying that it could be open to conservatives to edit, and as well as I was really scared by the fact that you opposed the Clery Act because it's something that has really protected me as in addition to Title IX.
Well, that was kind of misquoted. It was taken out of context. I didn't say I was against the Clery Act. I said it wasn't effective in communicating to parents or students what the real reality is on campus. The Clery Act was designed, ideally it was supposed to be, the Clery Act is the act that requires campuses to report statistics about crime on their campuses. But the standards for the Clery Act are not the same as the FBI Uniform Reporting Standards. So as a result, there's not apples to apples comparison between campuses. There's not even apples to apples comparison between campuses and law enforcement. So it's very hard. You can get the data, and you obviously have been impacted, and you've gotten the data, and you've paid attention. But for the vast majority of people, they have no idea what it is. They don't know where to find it. It's not helping anybody.
Yeah, even our administrators don't know what it is.
Well, yeah, so that's the point I was trying to make about Clary, is that it takes a lot of time of the administration for very little value added for students. And that's why our climate surveys would be so much better. The climate surveys would be very simple. They would be the same on every campus. You could compare campus to campus, how safe students feel, how much they feel like their university is engaged and involved in helping in this problem. So I think the climate surveys are so much better, and I'd like to see us fix the Clary statistics so they actually have some value. Now, I get what you're saying about opening Title IX, but that's just not the way I've operated in my life, that I'm not going to go near a piece of legislation that I can improve because I'm afraid somebody else will do something to it I don't like. We have a good body of Democrats that can block things in that Senate. And we have a number of bipartisan co-sponsors of this legislation. We worked really hard to get a bunch of Republicans on it. We got Chuck Grassley on it, for gosh sakes. I mean, we've got, you know, Dean Heller on it. We've got Kelly Ayotte on it. And they are not, you know, I think politically it's very difficult to let anybody screw with Title IX. They already have a woman problem.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine in this next year if they start trying to change Title IX to somehow make it less user-friendly for students? So I disagree. I know that some victim advocacy groups are all worried about opening Title IX. I mean, what's our choice? Just to say, gosh, the way it works now is perfect, when we know it's not, and we can improve it and make it simpler, not just for victims, but also for those who've been accused and for administrations. So I'm really excited about the legislation, and I'm sorry, and you're brave, and I hope you help us get it passed.
Thank you so much.
I'm Adam. I'm a temporarily displaced St. Louisan, and I'm kind of worried. So the a state that elects you and elects Democrats to statewide office should not be electing the kind of rabid state legislature we've got right now. I'm interested as somebody who's been involved in statewide politics and in the Missouri legislature, is there a path forward? Can we get a legislature that just a little bit more reflects like a basically reasonable citizenry?
We're working on it.
Okay.
I'm actively involved in recruiting. A lot of it is finding candidates. Come back to Missouri and run, please. I would want you to run for the state legislature. I'll plug you in a district immediately. We'll get you going, so to speak. We are really trying, and a lot of us are working on it. The other thing I'm working on is changing our campaign finance laws. Right now, we have a billionaire in St. Louis that is busy buying the state legislature, literally giving Speaker of the House $500,000, giving state legislative candidates $200,000. I mean, it's craziness. It's just craziness. We're the only state in the union where there's unlimited campaign contributions from any source and unlimited gifts from lobbyists, and no restriction on legislators immediately becoming lobbyists. I mean, there's nothing, it's the Wild West. So cleaning that up will also help, but we are busy working on that. We really got out, I mean, I think nationally, the Koch brothers and ALEC, those of you who have studied ALEC and what it's done, and the Koch brothers, they did a masterful job taking the fight to the state level over the last decade. We were busy counting electoral votes to make sure we could elect presidents, and they were taking over state legislatures, and they did a great job of doing that in Missouri, right under our noses.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good evening, Senator McCaskill. My name is Susanna Sandoval, and I'm currently a U.S. Senate candidate here in the state of Illinois. I thank you for your leadership. I believe the young lady who mentioned being a survivor and some of the women issues in general are really important to the work that's being done in a body of legislators where there's only 8 and will soon be 6, and there's women across the country. There are a few of us that are trying to join you in the ranks. The White House Project was a huge initiative that was created at some point in order to increase the leadership of women into the legislature. And as I've talked to people around the country and constituents here in the state, there's been some concern. You mentioned the campaign reform. Until that actually gets fixed, we won't have a greater opportunity to have a wider, vast array of folks to be done. And I can appreciate the camaraderie that you have with your fellow peers, but I'm wondering what other kinds of work are you doing on an individual basis cross-regionally in order to encourage young leaders like the ones that are sitting here today to be involved?
Well, I am very active in women's leadership groups in my state. I believe the women in my state know I'm very approachable. I mentor dozens of candidates every year in my state. A large majority of them have been women that I have helped, everything from statewide office to city council offices. So I try to put a hand out and pull up as many women as I possibly can. And I say, like I said tonight, that I'm even in states that aren't my own state, I will try to be helpful and direct women towards resources. There's a lot of resources out there for women who want to run now, many more than when I began in 1982. All you have to do is Google, and I'm sure there's a variety of women's organizations in Illinois that work with women in leadership and trying to groom young women and older women who are interested in public service, whether it be an appointed office or an elective office.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Hello, my name is Kolade Balagoon. I come from the School of Urban Prep, same as brother. I'm a freshman. And so I wanted to know, what was your, where do you stand in the Black Lives Matter what's called? Movement.
Black Lives Matter
movement. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think people who try to minimize the phrase Black Lives Matter by saying all lives matter don't understand what the phrase Black Lives Matter means. When you say Black Lives Matter, you're not saying that all lives don't matter. What you're saying is there has been a willingness sometimes in this country to not look in the eye the racial problems that we still face in this country. And we have to look those problems in the eye. It does matter. So there are a variety of things that I obviously have been involved in the aftermath of Ferguson to make changes to our criminal justice system in Missouri, our municipal court system in Missouri. I'm working on legislation in Washington to change the way that we fund federal funds, how federal funds go to local police departments, to make sure that they are getting the right equipment and the right training, and that we aren't having situations where policing becomes so adversarial that we just have distrust. We've got to get back to a community policing model where communities feel like the police are on their side and that it's not adversarial. It's possible. We did it in the 90s. We went to a community policing model. I even went so far to do community prosecutors. So in neighborhoods in Kansas City, the people that lived in that neighborhood not only knew which police officer to call, they knew which prosecutor to call to talk to about the problems on their block and in their neighborhood. We've got to get back to that model. Part of it is funding, that we've cut funding in so many ways that all everybody's doing is chasing 911 calls and not doing the community policing that builds trust. And if we don't start with building trust, we're never going to fix this problem. It is just going to exacerbate and get much worse. So those are the kinds of things I'm doing, and I'm really proud of you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening, Senator McCaskill. I'm Lauren. I'm from Chicago, but I used to live in Peoria. where there are a lot of Cardinals fans, so I empathize with your pain.
I wore red tonight just for you guys.
My question, Hillary Clinton appeared on Jimmy Fallon. Donald Trump is going to host Saturday Night Live. How do you feel about entertainment shows like that being a vehicle for politicians? And given how important these shows and influential these shows are, when are we ever going to get a female as a late night talk show host?
Isn't that the truth? Maybe that's what I should do. You know, I do think, I will say I'm proud that some of the late night spots, both the Colbert spot and the Daily Show, went to men of color, which is great. We didn't have any men of color in late night either, so now it's just the women that are left out. We've got to get some more women in there. But listen, I don't criticize any of the elected officials going on non-traditional programming for politicians, because I think you've got to meet the voters where they are. And I think one of the things that is hard when you're running, especially for President of the United States, is to be relatable. And I mean, Hillary Clinton did a lot to be relatable when she made fun of herself on Saturday Night Live. That self-deprecating humor matters. And it's hard to have self-deprecating humor when you're getting interviewed on Meet the Press. It's not so hard on Saturday Night Live. So I think it's fine they're going on all those programs. I mean, Bill Clinton kind of started it. Remember Boxers or Briefs, playing the saxophone? Yeah. And so now it's become very commonplace. In fact, I'll be on Colbert in November.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will mark our calendars for that. And in the meantime, please join me in thanking Senator McCaskill and Brandis Friedman for the conversation tonight. Thank you both so very much. I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, for all of you to stay seated for a moment. We are going to get Senator McCaskill situated at the back of the room where she can sign your books for those of you who are interested in purchasing a copy of her new memoir, Plenty Ladylike. So we'll actually allow that to happen now. It'll give me a chance also to thank once again the co-sponsors of tonight's event, our colleagues at the International House here, and Seminary Co-op, the bookstore, of course, which is providing books for tonight's event. Also, I wanted to let everybody know, if we haven't already, that David Axelrod, the founder and director of the Institute, has launched a new podcast where he is bringing you conversations just like the one you heard tonight, long-form conversations that take you behind the scenes into the forces and decisions and influences that shape many of the people driving our politics today. It's called The Axe Files. You can find out more about it on iTunes. We have Senator McCaskill moving down the hallway, so I will stop there. Thank you all very much for being here, and have a great evening.